What is up, Bitcoin miners? Welcome to the second episode of the day. Today, I am super excited. I'm always super excited. I'm always just a really excited guy. But we have Bob Burnett in the studio with us today. And if you guys don't know who Bob Burnett is the founder and CEO of Barefoot Mines, a Bitcoin mining company that is focused on building horse class mining sites. We'll get into the difference between horse class, elephant class, and rabbit class. But Bob is a very vocal proponent of the expansion of diversity in Bitcoin mining site geography, scale, and energy resources. Bob is the host of Old Man Yells, where he offers his perspective of technology, business, and the economy. Bob has spent 35 years as a technologist, including 13 years at Gateway Inc. And as the CTO, he has founded several companies in the Bitcoin mining space. He is an evangelist and an educator for Bitcoin and its importance to the world's future. He has a degree in computer engineering from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And Bob also sits on the board at Ocean. So it's safe to say that Bob knows his stuff. He is beating the drum of decentralization and not getting complacent in the world of Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining. So I am beyond excited to talk with Bob today. If you guys haven't gotten a chance to listen to his Old Man Yells episodes, I implore all of you to do that. He really does a really good job of just kind of explaining his take on it, and he tells really good stories. So with that, we're going to get into it, but I want to tell you guys about the Mastermind Club real fast.
Welcome to the Mastermind Club, your ultimate gateway into the world of Bitcoin mining. Whether you're just starting out or looking to scale your operations, our vibrant community of like-minded enthusiasts is here to support you every step of the way. Join us for weekly sessions led by industry pros, where you'll exchange ideas, brainstorm strategies, and stay motivated on your mining journey. From heat management to site optimization, our monthly deep dives cover the technical know-how you need to succeed. And with access to our entire back catalog, you'll never miss a beat. But that's not all. Our members enjoy exclusive one-on-one sessions with veteran miners, plus direct access to special pre-sales and insider opportunities at Bitcoin Mining World. Ready to take your mining to the next level? Join the Mastermind Club today and secure your spot in the future of Bitcoin mining. Visit bitcoinminingworld.com or scan the QR code now. And now back to the show.
Bob Burnett, welcome to the Build a Mind podcast.
Hello, Trevor. Nice to see you, sir.
It's good to have you here. I'm super excited about this. This has been something that I've wanted you on as a guest on my podcast since I first started when Mel came on my podcast, and she was telling your story of the elephants, rabbits, and horses. And she did a pretty good job of explaining the story to me. And so I do want to hear the story straight from you. But before we get into that, I want to kind of tell people about the Miner's Oath, which is something that you covered in episode 11 of Old Man Yells. And I wanted to start the show off with this specifically because people who are getting into Bitcoin, especially new Bitcoin miners, need to understand the ethos and the reason why we do what we do. Otherwise, there's a strong chance, and you talk about it in episode 12, or not episode 12, sorry. You talk about it in your article, Satoshi's Heel, which I'm going to dive into a little bit more. But it's this idea that if we get complacent and we don't understand or pay attention to what is important in Bitcoin, we could lose out on the opportunity that Bitcoin provides us. So I'm going to start with that. The Miner's Oath is, I willingly and proudly accept my responsibility to help protect and secure Bitcoin's base layer. I'll do so by making decisions and taking actions only within the ethos and best interests of Bitcoin. And I prioritize this over my financial gain. I do this because Bitcoin gives us all a path of hope and freedom.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that, Trevor. I hope that everybody out there, whether they take that oath or read that oath, or they just have that spirit, really attack what they do from that perspective. I'm afraid that a large percentage of people have entered mining, especially at the commercial level, with no thought toward anything similar to that. You know, very fiat mindsets that have what would I say? Maybe infected the network. And obviously, the network is bigger than any one person. It's stronger than any one person. It can withstand a certain degree of abuse and remains immune. But as you said, I think miners and even the general Bitcoin community maybe overestimate how much abuse it can take and how resilient it is. And that worries me. That worries me. I really appreciate that you've taken, at least from the messaging that I've projected, that this is a message that I hope carries forward. Maybe someday, 30, 40 years from now, you'll still be here. I probably won't. And there's somebody out there exploring Bitcoin as a topic, or studying the history of Bitcoin, or trying to write some sort of blog or do their own podcast, and they want to talk about how to remain financially sovereign, and like these sort of things. And I hope this stays with the world, so to say. I mean, at a minimum, I have 5 grandchildren already, and so someday I hope they wonder what their grandpa was thinking and doing, and they can find these kind of videos when I'm gone and still remember me. Or maybe it's even their kids, right? My great grandkids, like, hey, this was your grandpa, and he was out doing what he could, right, to fight, and also producing a warning that complacency is very, very dangerous. And so you may have heard me speak. It sounds like you've heard a lot of my shows. I believe that Bitcoin can be money for the next 1,000 years. And beyond be money, it can be the monetary network. It can be the key to solving so many of the world's problems. Well, to a certain degree, the more successful Bitcoin becomes, the more likely that complacency creeps in, that people think things are working fine. I don't have to worry. So if we fast forward, let's say we fast forward to those 40 years, and the most important monetary network in the world is Bitcoin. Most of the world's wealth is held or based in Bitcoin. The world is free and sovereign, and we have much less wealth disparity. We have a lot more social justice. I think a lot of these sort of big world problems are really rooted in a broken monetary system. So maybe those things start getting better, and that becomes the danger point, right? When people start thinking, oh, well, we can make changes, for instance, to the protocol, because we don't have to worry about this or that anymore, whatever that may be, right? We don't have to worry about the fact that maybe 40 years from now, we have only one creator of block templates, and what's there to worry about? And so there's that message out there that I think of miners as the guardians. That a lot of times in Bitcoin, we talk about the nodes and the power of the nodes, and they absolutely are very powerful and very integral to what goes on. But I think we miss the importance and the responsibility that comes with being a miner.
Yeah.
Of miners as just hashers, and we get things like I know you've had Mechanic and Luke on, and you mentioned I'm with Ocean. Well, part of my mission with being associated with Ocean and fulfilling that was like, hey, as a miner, I view my choice of block template every single time I do it, and we were the first company in the world to use Datum and start producing Datum templates. That's my vote every day. I'm voting every day, not with my hash power as much as with my template. telling the world, this is how I prioritize transactions. And in the future, if there's a soft fork activation or something like that, I'm going to vote. And you go back to the oath that you read. So, well, I'm going to implement what I do in the best interest of Bitcoin. And it's not really in the oath, but I believe when I do the best thing for Bitcoin day after day after day, that ultimately that actually is the best thing for me too. That that if you take the long-term low time preference approach, which a real Bitcoiner will do, you'll realize that making the best choice for Bitcoin is always making the best choice for yourself.
I completely agree with that. Well said. Well said. And I love what you guys are doing at Ocean. I come to Bitcoin from the lens of trying to find a way to protect myself and my child and my wife, my future generations. And when I first got into Bitcoin, it was definitely number go up. It was how can I get more financially stable? And now that I've been in Bitcoin for almost a full cycle, I'm starting to realize that there's more to financial security than just being able to store your wealth. A lot of it as a miner, a lot of it comes down to, like you just said, being able to have that sovereignty to choose which fork you use, which network you use, where your energy goes into, and then also the block template creation, which I think Datum is an amazing thing for the decentralization of Bitcoin. But there's also this factor, and I, for lack of a better word, you preach this out all the time with your horses, elephants, and rabbits story. And it's this idea of decentralizing physical miners, the actual infrastructure. And maybe you can just kind of explain to our audience the story of the elephants, the horses, and the rabbits, because I think it really kind of paints a really good picture of why we need rabbits and horses. And I would say you're a horse class miner and I'm a rabbit class miner. I'm running two machines at most. I do it for heat. I don't do it for the money aspect of it. In fact, I probably financially would have been better off to just buy Bitcoin with the money that I invested in my heaters, but it wasn't about that for me. So if you could just explain that a little bit, we can kind of continue from there.
Yeah. Well, I may lay in Satoshi's heel in this if you'll indulge me.
Do whatever. Go take it where you want to go, man.
So if we reverse the clock to the summer of 2021, summer Northern Hemisphere, so June of 2021, I was an active miner. I've been in the business since 2021. Was starting to understand. It takes a while, right? I'm a technical person with a technical background, but Bitcoin has all these layers. I'm starting to really understand what mining is after 4 years, getting down at the detail layer. And the China mining ban occurred. And we saw essentially overnight 50 to 60% of the hash power disappeared. So it's like, wow, right? Now that kicked off, for the miners that were left, the greatest period of economic prosperity that at least anybody currently active mining will still have. Obviously, the early guys did really, really well. If you were mining in the first couple of years, you held your Bitcoin, you killed it. But that period where we saw this 50% hash rate, it was essentially a way of instantly lifting the revenue of miners 50% overnight. And one thing that may not be apparent to people that are less involved in mining is that your costs are fixed in mining, right? So let's just say I was making 20%. My margins were 20%. Well, when the China mining ban happened and my revenue doubled, I wasn't making twice as much. I was making 5-6 times as much in profit because of that. My cost structure didn't change, but I'm winning all this. I'm participating in the network at a much higher percentage. So it led me to start thinking, and it's kind of what I'm prone to do. And I said, the good news was miners are making a lot of money, and nobody 51% attacked the network. Blocks slowed down for a little bit, but they sped back up pretty quickly. There wasn't that much disruption. The community almost celebrated, which I think is okay. It kind of celebrated amongst itself, saying, oh, look, we lost half or more of the world's hash rate overnight, and Bitcoin just keeps on ticking. And it was maybe the first major signal to me of this message we talked about before of invincibility. Like I think that there was this thought of invincibility that led me to say, well, how big would this thing have had to be for it to be a problem? So, okay, 50 or 60% loss in a one fell swoop was not enough. Well, how big would it have had to be to really be a problem? And under what conditions would that happen? So I started thinking about that second part first. So under what conditions would it happen? Well, I envisioned a world where even then we could see this migration that's only gotten worse toward large mining sites, more and more of the hash power going to large mining sites. And I took to taking those type of sites as elephants. And I said, well, they're individually, they're big and powerful, but they take a long time to grow, just like the gestation of an elephant takes a really long time. And once they're grown, they're very stationary. They don't move very well. And they're easy to spot, and that makes them easy to hunt. So if I was somebody that wanted to impair Bitcoin mining operations, I'm going to go hunt elephants first. So that led me to believe, like, well, that's kind of a danger point. And we'll get back to some of the math behind that in a minute. And then I looked at the other side and I said, well, the spirit of Bitcoin has always been with the individual pleb. If you read the book of Satoshi, you read the early workings, the early thought processes of Satoshi, he really wasn't thinking about the big elephant type organizations. He illustrates his vision by talking about baseboard heating, people essentially doing what you're doing. His thought was, well, if we have millions of individuals, he wasn't thinking of ASIC based systems or even GPU based systems. I think he was just thinking, hey, there's hundreds of millions of PCs in the world. If we can just have these hundreds of millions of PCs in the world running all the time and being stressed, they're going to generate this heat. And he really looked at mining more philanthropically as an end goal, just much we were talking about. Maybe even philanthropically is the wrong word, but as almost an obligation of being part of the system. And it's important to remember as well that he did not distinguish between the mining function and the node. So back in that period, there was no distinction between the node and the miner. They were the same thing. Now, a node could choose not to mine. It would have that capability, but you could turn that function off if you didn't want to. But it was still, the thought was each person would be out there essentially solo mining and going for this. And he didn't envision pools and farms. Well, as I was thinking about the beauty of the pleb mining, I realized that they're like rabbits. And they're rabbits in that any one rabbit being impaired is meaningless. There's no power of individual rabbits. But you get thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of rabbits together and you put them in a farmer's field, they'll do a hell of a lot of damage, right? So they can be powerful when united in a common cause. And the other thing is, if you start trying to hunt the rabbits, you might hit a couple, but the moment you hit them, they'll scatter and they'll disappear and they'll hide. So hunting the rabbits to extermination is impossible. Hunting the elephants to extermination, especially if that's your intent, very probable. So then I looked in the middle of those 2 points. So says, well, there's a long way between somebody with an S19 in their garage or in their office heating part of their home and a 100 megawatt facility somewhere in Texas, right? There's a big point in the middle. And the point in the middle, I realized, was what I was doing. not initially out of a plan, but just by happenstance, that Barefoot was a horse. And a horse is a small to medium size commercial miners, developing sites of a few hundred kilowatts to a few megawatts. The beauty of a horse is that they can be built relatively quickly, certainly much faster than an elephant can be constructed. They're almost always built in a mobile fashion inside a hash hut or a shipping container or something like that. They're often wild, which we can talk about wild and captive, but wild sites are ones where the power production occurs, or one characteristic of being wild, I should point out, is producing your own energy and having a source of unpermissioned energy. That's what I mean by wild. Because a captive company, part of being a captive company is one in which the source of energy is permissioned. You need somebody else's approval, permission, and that can go away. Even if you have a contract, it can go away. You're one election away from Elizabeth Warren being the Secretary of Energy or something like that, and boom, your on-grid operations are exposed. So these three distinct classes kind of emerged in my head, and I wrote an article for anybody interested in Bitcoin Magazine where I talk about this, and then I talk about captive and wild. And by the way, I don't just say on-grid and off-grid, because there are other aspects where captive can come into play. One of those being public. If you make a decision to be a public company, even if by chance your energy was off-grid, you're still captive. That you are now in a situation where the auditors, the regulators, the tax authorities have an inordinate amount of say in what goes on in your business, and they can shut you down or they can modify how you're going to operate. Now, they could do that to me potentially as well, especially here in the US. It's possible. It's partly why I'm pushing even my own organization for geographic disparity. I was just on a call earlier today with an energy provider well outside the bounds of the US, trying to work on that diversity for myself, but also for the network, right? So why is that all of this important? Well, there's a second article I wrote called Satoshi's Heel. And I go back to that original question. How big would the China mining ban have to have been to have caused the problem? So I imagined a scenario X number of years in the future where 99% of the hash power was sitting with elephants and 1% was with the horses and rabbits. And by the way, it goes on that way for 5 or 7 years with no problems. Okay. And there's no longer any viable hash power sitting on the sidelines. Okay. Now imagine one day there's only let's say there's 100 elephant sites around the world that have this 99% of the hash power. One day, a coordinated effort of the appropriate authorities says, we're going to shut down, not 51% attack. I don't think that's actually the attack vector. What we're going to do is we're going to shut down 100% of the elephants overnight. Now, they would also do that timed with the difficulty adjustment. Those less technical, Bitcoin's 10-minute block times are maintained by every 2016 blocks looking back at the previous 2015 actually blocks and saying, have we averaged about 10 minutes? Well, basically, how long has the average block taken? And if it's been too long, like we've been taking 11 minutes, they make the difficulty easier. If they've been at 9 minutes, they make it harder. In simplistic terms. But your next chance to adjust that is 2016 blocks away. Now, if all 99% of the network were turned off instantaneously, block times would go from 10 minutes to about 18 hours. And there wouldn't be hash power on the sidelines to suddenly turn on and suck up the gap, right? There's just that 1% trying to do its thing, okay? And by the way, those people are losing a ton of money because there's only one block a day being produced, right? They're now even struggling to maintain themselves. So no new hash power is unlikely to be coming online either. So in that case, it will take almost, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head because I haven't looked at it in a little bit. I think it's on the order of 4 years for the to get to the difficulty adjustment, right? Because it'll take basically one block a day, or 1.25 blocks a day for 2,000 days to get to the difficulty adjustment.
Mm-hmm.
So in essence, what would happen is all the Bitcoin would be secure, but no transactions would be occurring. You couldn't remove your Bitcoin from cold storage. You couldn't pay somebody in Bitcoin. Like, it would just create a complete impairment of the network, which would clearly shake world confidence in Bitcoin, right? Nobody's lost anything, but it's not functional. Now, let's say we trudge through and we get through the 4 years. The difficulty adjustment takes place. What I would do if I were the nation states who had coordinated this attack is, as soon as the difficulty adjustment occurred, I would turn all the machines on. And now what would happen is we would get to a new difficulty adjustment in like 2 days. We'd get through 2,000 blocks really quickly because the network thinks that there's no bandwidth available.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would turn it off again. And we could wait another 4 years. So in the space of 8 years, you could see maybe 4,000 blocks get processed. And I think that attack vector, which is purely hypothetical, it's a mental exercise. I want to be clear, I'm not predicting it, but it's not impossible, would be a way to kill Bitcoin. And it would happen because as a community, we became complacent. We let there be nothing but elephants. It's hard to stop elephants from growing. But without getting into some of the statistics in detail, what I can say is that as long as 30% of the network sits within the rabbits and the horses, then I won't lose sleep. Now, I think it should be actually be like 70%.
Mhm.
Like why and at 15%. So at if we're at 30%, there should be warning lights going on everywhere. You know, at 15%, it would be like the tornado sirens and the tsunami sirens. Like there should be mass panic within the community over this and a revolt against it. And that's why I don't think this is going to happen today. I don't think it's going to happen next year. I said I'm 60 years old. Maybe it doesn't happen in my lifetime. But I want Bitcoin to be money for 1,000 years. And that's that complacency thing. So what's the likelihood that you we go 2, 3, 4, 5 generations into the future and they forget what fiat money did to us. They forget what centralized control of a monetary system caused us.
Mhm.
And there we go. Which, by the way, interesting parallel. When the US Constitution was created, debate about whether or not there should be a central bank was a massive piece of the debate. And that debate continued all the way into to 1913 when the Fed was actually enacted. I will give credit to the establishment system for doing a masterful job of manipulating the public into believing that having a central authority, a trusted central authority, I use the word trusted in quotes, is paramount and essential to, a functioning economy and society. And, we now live in a society where even guys my age, I was 7 years old from when we went off the gold standard, which I think was the coup de grace of a plan set in place in 1913 to, move the US to the reserve currency, remove us from the gold standard, and give this system carte blanche. And do not underestimate the ability of certain organizations to plan with very long-term horizons. And I think that's some. So we have to have the same thought process, though. That's kind of what I'm saying here, right? Our opportunity is in front of us. I believe that Bitcoin is divinely inspired. I believe this is a gift to all of us, but it is not a be all end all that we can just neglect and it'll still save us. Like we have to take care of it. If we screw it up, well, shame on us, right? But
Mhm.
and I don't believe we ever get another chance either, by the way. I think this is
I agree with that completely. I think that this is our one shot, our one opportunity to take back our sovereignty and our control, and it's something that humanity has never had the actual opportunity to do. Um, like there's a lot of ways that I want to take this. So I'm trying to gather my thoughts here because the way that you tell that story, it resonates with me deeply. I grew up in a world where, like, my grandparents, they were able to buy, they had a really nice home. My grandfather, he was the only one that worked. My grandmother raised a family. They had 2 vehicles. They took vacations every year, and they had a really decent life. And my grandmother, she would always tell me, save money, make sure that you put money away, and I would listen to her. But when it came time for me to leave home and start a family of my own, it didn't matter how much money I had saved. It didn't matter what I did because the system was so broken, and it was kind of outside of her purview because she grew up in this world thinking that, the monetary system was secure. And so this kind of set the precedent for me to go, what the hell is happening here and how do I fix it? And that's kind of what led me towards Bitcoin. And when I found Bitcoin, it was like this orange light that carried me out of this very depressive, like dark moment in my life. And so now I'm on this journey of like, okay, how do I beat this drum and say to my fellow man, we call them normies, call them pre-corners, call them whatever you want. Um, beat this drum and say, like, we have this opportunity here today, right now, to secure, like you said, money for 1,000 years. We have the ability to change the future of hundreds of millions of people, if not hundreds of billions of people, because 1,000 years, that's a lot of lifetimes.
A lot of people. Yeah.
It's a lot of people. But, and this is why I resonate so deeply with what you've been saying, is that if we don't stand up, beat the drum, take personal responsibility for our own actions and what we do within the network, then we are just obfuscating responsibility and allowing these people who have taken control of the ship and who are actively driving us towards the shore, trying or towards an iceberg, trying to sink us. Like, we're going to lose. We're going to lose this opportunity. And I believe that we can win. White pills around. I believe that we have this opportunity to take back what is rightfully ours, a God-given right, what we deserve to have, which is sovereignty to make our own choices. And that's why I love what you talk about. And the reason I think that I gravitate towards you is the stories that you tell, because you make it very clear and understandable as to why we need to create our own block templates, why we need to protect the network as much as possible by remaining small and uncontrollable. I had a conversation with Tyler Stevens today. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Tyler, but he's a great guy. He's working out of the space in Colorado, and he's a thermal engineer. And he and I were talking about this idea that, we're pleb miners. We mine for heat. We enjoy this hash rate heat punk ethos. And 25% of the world's energy is used for comfort heating, low grade comfort heating. Now, I don't have the numbers, so you'll have to trust me on this, and you should verify it for yourself. But 1% of that 25%, if just 1% went to hash rate heating, so we're talking 100 million homes having heaters, baseboard heat in their house. He said something along the lines of it would triple the network as it stands today. And that's something that I think can be done within the next 20 years. I think that if we have more people like myself, like you, pounding this drum of decentralize, write your own block templates, build heaters, build products, build businesses that decentralize this, we can actually create these rabbit class, horse class miners that help to secure this network from these large attack vectors.
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you whether the math is 100% right or not, but what I certainly believe that a massive percentage of the world's energy consumption does go toward heating, and especially if we include people burning wood and burning charcoal and burning natural gas in that equation, it's a very large number. Some of those are very inefficient forms of heating as well, as I'm sure you know.
Mm-hmm.
But philosophically, I completely agree with that. And I think I would challenge everybody out there. If you're a Bitcoin owner, I'll back up. If you're a homeowner, you have certain responsibilities, right? You're going to take care of your house. When there's a leaky pipe, you're going to fix the pipe. When there's a crack in the cement on your driveway, you're going to fix it. You're going to buy insurance against these things, and all those you're protecting your property. You're taking an active role in protecting your property. And I think there's this thought process in Bitcoin that I think it's dangerous to a certain degree, where people buy Bitcoin, and some of them even compare it to real estate and say, oh, look, with Bitcoin, I don't pay property taxes. I don't pay insurance. I don't have to do maintenance. I'd say those are true, but are you really being a responsible property owner as a Bitcoin property owner? And I would say it would be appropriate for you to take a role in that. And I think being a node runner and being a pleb miner is how you take care of your property. And when you push that responsibility onto others, it's selfish, first of all. It's a very selfish act. And it's way outside the spirit of Bitcoin. In fact, I think we could even take that oath, which is the Bitcoin miner oath, but in reality, it's maybe the Bitcoin owner oath. Like you could take it that far, because I think those should also be synonymous things. That if you're a Bitcoin owner, you should be a miner. Like at some level, I don't care if it's a BitAxe. I don't care if you're throwing, 1 terahash a second for 6 hours a day at the thing, but you're actively participating. You're doing something. And by the way, your knowledge level, I just spoke last week at a couple conferences in LA. And this is one of the things I encouraged everybody in the audience to do is I said, please go buy something. I don't care what it is, an old S9, a BitAxe, or whatever, and mine. You're gonna lose money if you want to look at it in raw fiat terms. But what you're going to gain in terms of knowledge is immeasurable. Which, by the way, that in and of itself is part of protecting Bitcoin. You have to be a knowledgeable Bitcoiner. A completely different rabbit hole, but as you probably know, I am not a fan of ordinals and inscriptions. And my reasoning is probably very different than most people have ever heard, though. And for instance, I believe, I guess maybe I'll take it at least peek down in the rabbit hole. One of the many vectors is that I believe it is an attack on the verbiage of Bitcoin. If you read a book like 1984, which if you have not read it, anybody out there, if you have not read 1984 as an adult, you need to go reread it. Because I love that a lot of schools, hopefully they still do, will take a 16 or 17-year-old and they'll ask them to go read 1984. But the truth of the matter is that their ability to truly absorb it is not very good, right? Well, I reread it within the last year, and it resonates with me in so many ways. And my conclusion of the book is that the biggest way in which society was attacked and controlled was through language. That if you remember terms like double speak and double talk and like all that, they're seminal pieces of that book, and they're dumbing down society. They're confusing society when words have diametrically opposed meanings. It creates confusion. That's what ordinals and inscriptions does. A sat, a satoshi, is a unit of measurement expressing the value of a UTXO. It has no ordinal quality as defined by the protocol. So when you have a movement that professes to be bringing new people into Bitcoin as one of its key attributes, and what you're telling these new people is that a sat is essentially a individual tangible item with ordinal qualities, you have attacked one of the most important terms within the Bitcoin protocol, which is a sat, a Satoshi. And you're also attacking a UTXO. What is a UTXO? You're confusing people. So I have a lot of reasons why I believe that is a really bad movement for Bitcoin. I know I can't stop them, but what I hope I can do is, in my small way, educate people about what it is and what it isn't. And most importantly, that it is not any part of Bitcoin. And there's like, you may have heard me speak about this. Words are really important. Specificity and words are really important. And this is my engineering mathematical mind, which requires that kind of precision. I don't think I'm on the spectrum or anything, but like I am very particular about this stuff. And it's because of that. So like the Ordinals crew, they'll start using terms like, well, when challenged, like I had this just in the last week, when challenged, they'll say, well, you're right. Ordinals is not part of Bitcoin. It sits on top of Bitcoin. And I'll say, no, don't give me that shit. It sits outside of Bitcoin. It does not sit on top of Bitcoin. Those are two very different words, and the precision of those words is very important. When you sit on top of it, it means you are connected to it like lightning.
Mm-hmm.
And, you're essentially providing a service to it, right? And just like if you look at like the protocol stack of that the internet runs on, okay, all those stacks, each of those levels is important to the one below it and the one above it. Okay. Well, Ordinals doesn't do that. It sits outside of the system. It's a completely different interpretation, a false interpretation of what's happening inside the system. So when we let people do things like that say, well, no, you shouldn't worry about it. It sits on top of Bitcoin. And yeah, technically you're right. It's a sat doesn't exist, but the world loves rare pennies. They should love rare sats. Like we have very few people, in my opinion, willing to stand up and fight these kind of battles. And some of them seem insignificant or petty or, but I think they're fundamental. And go back again to what we said before, Bitcoin will be continually attacked. And not every attack is a nuclear bomb. An attack vector can be a series of paper cuts that occur over an extended period of time that bleed you to death.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think people are often cognizant of that. That's what the fiat system was. The fiat system was not a nuclear bomb on society. The fiat system and the money printing is death by 1,000 paper cuts. Well, we're bleeding pretty badly now because we got 5 decades of paper cuts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What that kind of reminds me of is in episode 12 of Old Man Yells, you tell the story of the 10th man. And the 10th man is basically when the entire crowd or 90% of the crowd is saying one thing, beating this drum of, maybe it's ordinals, maybe it's, changing the block size. It could be anything. It could be outside of Bitcoin. The 10th man's moral duty is to come in and not only just argue the other point, the other side, but provide evidence to the contrary. And I think that is exactly what you do. That is your role within Bitcoin, is to be the 10th man and to say, no, this is not a part of Bitcoin. This is not healthy to the ecosystem. This is not safe for us, and this will bleed us dry.
Well, thank you for saying that. I do try to embody that. I am trying to be a 10th man. I don't want to be the 10th man because I hope I'm not. because I think we need lots of them. So I'd like to be a 10th man.
Yeah.
And I hope there are others out there, also willing to be 10th man. And I do. There are some others that, you had Mechanic on. Mechanic, I
Yes.
think, embodies, and he's a good friend. And obviously we work together at Ocean. But there are other guys, for instance, Parker Lewis, who's somebody that I know and respect and consider a friend as well. Parker is a 10th man, and there are others. I'm not going to try to list them all,
Yeah.
but we need more. We
Mhm.
need more. And not every 10th man has to be somebody that is guests on podcasts and writes articles and is visible. You can be a 10th man in whatever circle you're in. And, it may be that you live in Boise, Idaho, and you go to the Boise, Idaho meetups, and that's your circle. And well, frickin' 10th man up, man, and don't let them go down these paths. And I've gone to Bitcoin meetups several times around the country. And it is interesting when I go to the Bitcoin meetups that there is a wide diversity of, what would you say? Pureness within those different groups.
Mhm.
And I mean, I guess it's okay. Any group can get together and be whatever it is they wish, but I would hope that there's at least somebody within those groups that is evangelizing and being a guardian for the truth, because those are conversion points for a lot of people.
Mhm.
Their first entrance into Bitcoin can be a friend dragged them along to a meetup. Say, hey, we're gonna go have drinks tonight. Hey Trevor, I've been going to this Bitcoin meetup. There's a great group of people. Let's go have a few beers with these people tonight. And I coax you in for the first time. I mean, we probably sound like a religious group or a religious cult,
Yeah.
but but the truth of the matter is we are trying to convert people, and we are trying to take people that, using some of the terminology that have been blind. Like there are people that have been blind and misled and lied to.
Mhm.
And at a certain level, we should feel an obligation to make sure that they at least have a chance to do it. Now, I'm a little different about it than I was, let's say, back in 2017.
Mhm.
I think a lot of people, once you've been in for a while, you change a little bit. You have to, I'm not stopping random people walking down the street saying, hey, do you know anything about Bitcoin?
Yeah.
But within my life, within my circles, the people that I connect to, um, when the time is right, I make sure that they know what I do and why I do it. Some of them think I'm crazy. Some of them are indifferent, and a small percentage start to listen.
Yeah. I have had several come to Jesus moments, I guess you could say. Ever since I got into Bitcoin, I really didn't have much of a shitcoin phase, and I know most people do have a phase like that. My phase of shitcoinery was, being on Coinbase, where I first started buying Bitcoin, when Coinbase would give you, like, you do this thing and you get $3 of this coin.
Oh yeah. I did that.
That
Watch the tutorial. Like I remember
Exactly.
that. Yeah, yeah.
That was my phase of shitcoinery. And I quickly got out of that and went straight down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. And
Good for you.
ever since, I have been beating this drum. Anybody who's willing to listen to me, anybody who's willing to have a conversation with me, I will bring up Bitcoin in one way, shape, or form, just to gauge where they're at. And I can't tell God bless my wife. I can't tell you how many times my wife has rolled her eyes, sighed, just kind of like tuned out completely. But it's gotten to the point where she recognizes the reason why I'm doing this. I've said it, I've preached it a million times to her, and she's just like, babe, I know, I get it, I understand. I'm like, then why don't you get into Bitcoin? She's like, because I have you, and I wish she would get more involved, but at the end of the day, everybody kind of comes to Bitcoin from their own angle. And I've reached this point where now I don't try to orange pill people, because orange pilling people doesn't happen. People orange pill themselves. People come into Bitcoin after they've had so many touch points and they start to understand why the fundamentals matter. And so what I see is my role as the 10th man, as a 10th man, is to continually speak about Bitcoin. No matter how many people are rolling their eyes or telling me that I'm crazy or telling me that I'm in some kind of crazy cult, I will continue talking about Bitcoin. I will continue learning about Bitcoin. I will continue listening to Bitcoin podcasts, reading the books, going to conferences and meetups, and just learning and ingesting as much as possible. And then not just like spouting the same rhetoric that everyone else is spouting. My biggest thing is I try to form my own opinions. And if I can't form my own opinion, what I'll do is I'll listen. I'll keep listening until I have the ability and the basis to make a decision that comes from a background of thought. I think that's really important. And to be real, to be honest, my biggest fear in Bitcoin, something that keeps me up at night when I think about the future of Bitcoin, is the more people that are coming into Bitcoin from the side of like the ETFs and captured Bitcoin. They're holding Bitcoin, sure. They have Bitcoin, but they don't believe in the ethos of Bitcoin. And the
Yeah.
more people that come into it from that, it scares me that Bitcoin will become captured, just like quote unquote gold. And so my role, again, as a 10th man, is to just continually beat that drum and continually, no matter what someone else thinks of me, is to just preach the word of Bitcoin. And it is kind of like a religion, Bob. It's very much like, honestly, I would say it's just as important, if not more important, than religion.
Yeah, I think the only difference is really the word worship.
Yeah.
That the difference between how important I think Bitcoin is versus my spirituality is that I don't worship Bitcoin. I don't believe it's a higher power. But I did say this before. I believe it is divinely inspired.
Mm-hmm.
And I have something I'm working on that I'll just preface it, here today, because I'm not ready to do the whole thing. But I believe that Bitcoin was created as a trinity. And I believe the trinity is the greatest organizational structure ever created. And if we look at the most powerful organizations in the world, both the good ones and the bad ones, that they are formed in the image of the Trinity, a Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Or put another way, an executor, a creator, like God, an executor of the plan, which in Christianity is Christ, and a consciousness, an overseer, which is the Holy Spirit. And so whether you're Christian or not, it doesn't matter. But then you look at the US structure, which we have 3 branches of government. We have the Congress, which is actually the creator. The Congress, at least it's supposed to be, the direction of the country. The president is, ironically, I think most people would think the president's the creator. He's actually supposed to be the executor. And the Supreme Court is our consciousness. It's supposed to keep us on the straight and narrow. But if you look at, let's say, a crime organization like the mafia, what you'll find is that they have the same image. They have the Don, who is the creator. They have the underboss, who is the executor, executes the plan of the Don, and then you have the consigliere, who keeps all the troops in line, makes sure that everybody, is the same way. And I think in Bitcoin, well, actually, let me back up before I even say Bitcoin. The fiat system was created, in my mind, in the same way, that we have the creator role really comes back from the old money, old banking systems, the Rothschild, JP Morgan kind of, folks. And we have in the executor role, we have organizations like the Fed. And then we have in the kind of the consciousness role, as we have the governments of the world enforcing these rules and regulations. And that allows this fiat system to exist. And I believe Bitcoin sits in the face of that. And we have a creator, clear creator, right? Which is, I'm not going to say Satoshi, I'm going to say the white paper. We have executors, which are the miners and the nodes. And we have a consciousness which comes from the plebs. That, so that's how I interpret this whole thing. And if one of those pieces doesn't function right, the whole thing falls apart, right? And so the point, this is a very long-winded way of responding to like your comment about like if everything moves to the ETFs, we lose the plebs, we lose, that spirit. We could, by the way, lose control of other aspects too, like of mining. And like my talk in LA last week was a lot about how ultimately I think that the elephants that we fight are not Riot and Marathon and those folks, although I'm generally not a fan of what they do. Mm-hmm. But it's going to be the nation states and the big banks that roll in. That I may have the names wrong, but I believe the big miners of the future are companies, organizations like Bank of America and Citigroup and Deutsche Bank and Mitsui, the biggest financial institutions of the world, in addition to nation states. And I believe that nation states that do not mine will lose their sovereignty. That, and I think it's the natural extension of thinking forward. Imagine a world where the economy is Bitcoin centric, at least a major portion of it, right? So if you don't mine, it has nothing to do, by the way, with how much Bitcoin you have. It has to do with the template creation and your ability to manage templates. So like one of the things I said in my speech is, imagine you are the president of Bolivia right now. You're a second, third world country. Maybe you have 0.5% of the world's economy runs through your country. In today's system, you are dependent on the US and the SWIFT system, which most commerce flows through the SWIFT system. So you have to have at least a good enough relationship with the United States to have permission to do international commerce. Now, I know this is going to probably sound scary, but in the future with Bitcoin, there's a scenario where it's worse. The scenario is there are only 53,000 blocks a year. There's nothing we can really do to change that. And each of those blocks will only contain roughly 4,000 transactions. So that's 200 million annual transactions serving 8 billion people, 330 million companies in the world. That's a pretty daunting disparity between the capacity of the base layer and the number of potential users or desirable users desiring it. So if you are Bolivia, then and you're 0.5% of the world's economy, well, you probably need a couple blocks a day that the transactions of the country, the citizens of Bolivia, the corporations of Bolivia, and the state business of Bolivia will for sure be included in blocks. Or you have the potential of being completely locked out. So we live in a world where today, if I want to send you some Bitcoin, Trevor, I can almost certainly, by paying the right fee, guarantee that I can send you that money in 20 minutes. Almost certainly, right? Mm-hmm. Certainly within 60, I could guarantee it. But if in a future world, and I think this is highly likely, how much money I pay may be completely irrelevant, because the person or the organizations making the majority of the template decisions are not motivated by the block reward. They are motivated by, again, I'll use that Bolivia example. Bolivia wouldn't care how much money they were making on those transactions. The government of Bolivia needs to make sure that the businesses of Bolivia can do their business. That's much more important than the block reward. That if there's I'm trying to think, somebody in Bolivia makes hot water heaters and they need to buy steel from China and copper from Russia and I don't know, plastic from Japan or whatever, they need to make sure that the transactions sending that money to those suppliers get to those suppliers so that the goods can get to Bolivia. That's way more important than the block reward. That's a completely different way of thinking than I think most people do. They think of miners, and this is one of those falsehoods, I think, too. There's this belief perpetuated by people that predated me that miners are some sort of capitalist, greedy people that should always mine the fattest blocks and, blah, blah, blah. I don't think that's true if you're ethos-centric, but I also don't think it's true in the future if you're a large bank or you're a government mining either, that you're not motivated that way. And that changes everything, by the way. So like this block template creation, the datum product that I know you've already covered on your show. But this allows, if as the plebs, as the horses and the rabbits, if we control 30% of the template creation, then we allow the spirit of Bitcoin as it exists today to at least always be there in some form, in some reasonable percentage. Because ironically, the success of Bitcoin will bring in our enemies, what we perceive as our enemies right now. We believe, I think most Bitcoiners would say, well, the nation states are our enemies, the central banks are our enemies, the big financial institutions are our enemies. Well, as soon as we start getting successful, and we are, expect them to want to be miners. They, by the way, not owning Bitcoin, the fear should not be how much Bitcoin these organizations and people have. Worry a lot less about that, and we're a lot more about, do they control block template creation?
Yeah. Wow. Man, I've gotten a lot from this episode. I don't know. Do you have any more time, or?
I can go like 15 more minutes if you have another question or something.
Well, to be honest, I have a lot of questions that I prepared, and we have gotten to maybe 3 of them. And I think that just kind of speaks to like how you're able to tell a story. So we'll just kind of start closing up. I have a few questions that I want to ask you as someone who, you're part of the boomer generation. You have seen times change significantly. And you kind of project this air of, times have changed before, they can change again. And that could be for the good, that could be for the bad. And so I want to hear your opinions and your thoughts on where the Bitcoin ecosystem is headed. Where, 5 years from now, one full cycle from now, where do you think Bitcoin mining is going to be done? Like, is this going to be centered around, all the geopolitical stuff that's happening today, right now? Is this going to be something that we need to be fearful of, like, to the extent of, like, we need to batten down the hatches, we need to start acting now? Or is this something that, like, if we do the right things, can we actually live in a more prosperous world? I don't know if that frames the question properly.
Okay, I'll give it a shot. I think that 5 years is a really long period of time.
Yeah.
It may not feel like it, but it is. It's a massive amount of time. In one respect, it will go in a flash, but in another respect, the level of change that will occur will be jaw-dropping.
Mm-hmm.
What issues we face, we only are guessing. What companies and individuals will be the most influential, we can only guess.
Mm-hmm.
5 years ago, Michael Saylor wasn't here. MicroStrategy wasn't here. None of the public mining companies were here. None of that existed. 5 years from now, my speculation would be those companies that have gained prominence in this cycle, a half or more of them will have fallen to irrelevance. A new group of influencers will emerge, whether that's, in the classic social media sense, but more importantly, like, who's really driving the industry forward, where are decisions being made, how's capital being deployed. We'll see radical changes. Growth is very hard. So, like, one of the things I certainly learned from my personal computing days was that each company, especially if you look at a company or an organization that starts finding success, that you go through stages in any company, not even Bitcoin specific. As your revenue grows, as your number of employees grow, as your number of customers grow, as your number of locations grow, all these sorts of things that you must typically add to continue to grow and be successful, add a lot of complexity and a lot of risk. And eventually they break almost everybody. So, like, my company, I'll use Gateway as an example, my days in Gateway. When I joined Gateway in 91, I started working with Gateway. I think we had like 800 employees, and we were doing several $100 million a year in business. So it was already had some legs by the time I joined. 10 years later, we'll call it 2000, 10 years go by, we have 25,000 employees. We're doing 10 billion a year in revenue. We had $1 billion a year in profit. We were making 10 million PCs a year. That happened in 10 years. And so, what is that? That's 30x growth in employees. That's 15x growth in revenue, 15x growth in profit. I think probably about a 15x growth in the number of PCs that we were making. We went from essentially having one location in South Dakota to having manufacturing facilities and call centers all over the world. And I'm very proud of what we did, because we had to reinvent ourselves over and over and over again to accomplish that. But eventually, I'll stay at a very high level, trying to grow further broke us. That happened to be the break point for us, trying to go from 10 billion, 25,000 people. We were became a Fortune 200 company. Trying to grow to the next level is what broke us. That will happen in Bitcoin too. That will mean exchanges fail. That will mean custodial solutions fail. An ETF might fail. I can't predict the what's, but I can predict a whole bunch of that stuff will happen. But that's the negative part. The positive part is that lots of lots of new exciting things will come into the infrastructure. As an example, today in the mining industry, we are reliant on Bitmain almost exclusively, with maybe a minor head nod to MicroBT for all the ASICs and all the systems. And we are dependent on their ability to produce the chips and then design the systems. And the systems they develop are not terribly creative. And they don't have to be, because they have a monopoly.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in the next 5-year space, there will be several other companies developing chips, including one I'm involved with. And some of those companies will just sell the chips. They won't sell systems, which
Mm-hmm.
means other companies can emerge. Like you're involved in home heating. Why, what we should be developing are not repurposing hash boards or repurposing systems and building them into heaters. We should be designing those heaters from the ground up
Mm-hmm.
as a heater. And if you want to build a pet bed, a pool heater, I'm involved in a project where we're heating a greenhouse. Let's design the product right from the first time. We're not trying to take an S19 and turn it into a furnace, for instance. Like we'll
Mm-hmm.
design it right from the first. So all of this creativity is going to emerge, and then we'll have a massive amount of competition as well. That's going to drive down not only the price of mining, but if we take, again, an analogy to the personal computer industry, in the personal computer industry between, let's say, 1991 and 1995, we had a massive transformation in the usability of personal computing. In 1991, we were mainly, I don't even know if you know what this is, we were mainly still staring basically at a C prompt, running an MS-DOS, meaning there was no graphical user interface. We had crude spreadsheets and word processors. We could copy files. We could do all that, but it was all done some command line prompts,
Mm-hmm.
right? And by 1995, we had Windows 95, which was a groundbreaking product that brought the graphical user interface to the mainstream. And products went from one where you would have no hope of plopping your grandma down in front of a computer in 1990 and saying, trying to explain to her what to do, to now in 1995, she's doing things very reminiscent of what we do today, 30 years later. She may have been on AOL reading news articles or sending an email or whatever, and it would look very crude and rudimentary, but it would still be like, in essence, what we are doing today. You would recognize it, and you would see the DNA, the core DNA of what we have today in those activities. Well, that's going to happen in Bitcoin, and I think it's very important because we talked quite a bit today about plebs being involved. Well, products have to be designed from the beginning that are consumer friendly,
Mm-hmm.
that allow people to be a miner, to be a node, and remove the technical intimidation that goes with it today. Even for me, like if I want to spin up a new node or whatever, I kind of go, oh, like, okay, it's reminiscent of when I would buy a PC in, let's say, 1990, where I would have
Mm-hmm.
to install all this software from floppy disks and CDs. Like instead of buying a PC and opening the thing and turning it on and boom, like you can today buy a PC, open the box of a brand new PC and probably be, on the internet, accessing all your data and doing things in like 10 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Like, Well, that was a weekend project, and it would screw up more times than it would work, and you'd have to start over, and you'd like reformat the hard disk, start over. Oh, the device driver didn't go right. The whatever you may have to do flash new hard. That's where we are, and I think that's like you have this worry that I understand, that you expressed about people coming in through the ETF. The reality is that's the way a lot of people are going to come into ETF, into Bitcoin.
Mhm.
Hopefully, they'll realize that they're kind of one step removed from Bitcoin, just like the Ordinals people hopefully will realize they're one step removed from Bitcoin too. And a new person coming in through that door. But there'll be this impetus to really learn. But the easier we can make it for them to learn and to participate, the better off we are. And I think that will happen in this 5-year window.
Yeah, I'm hopeful. I'm very hopeful, and I think that it's just going to take us continually beating that drum, iterating on the projects and the development that we're working on. I'm excited to see it, and I'm excited for the world that my son is going to grow up in. I have one more question for you, and then we can close this out. So I ask everyone this question. I love the diverse answers that I get, and I think you'll have a really good answer. So I want to ask you, Bob, what does Bitcoin mean to you?
Well, Bitcoin is the future to me. I and not my future, but humanity's future. That it is the fork in the road, and we have, without sounding overly dramatic, we have two forks, and one is dystopian, and I don't want to say the other is utopian, because there are other things in the world, but one is bright and sunny and free, and the other is dark and gloomy. And so, I'm here tonight talking to you. I do what I do first and foremost for, that future, for the people I love, for the people I care about, and just for humanity in general. It is the defining point of our future.
Beautifully put. Absolutely beautiful, man. We are on the path to that bright orange future, and I'm grateful to people like you beating that drum, the 10th man out there. I'm honored that you agreed to come on my podcast today. This has probably been one of my. I have a lot of favorite episodes. I have a lot of favorite guests, but this is one of my favorites, and you're definitely within the top 5 of my favorite conversations that I've had on this podcast. So
well. Thank you, Trevor. I appreciate being on your show. Yeah, there's no need to compare. Everybody's out there doing, hopefully doing their part. If they took the time to come on your show, then I respect them and I applaud them. And I applaud you for being out there, spreading the word. And whether one person watches this or a million, and maybe it's in the year 2140 when we're mining the last Bitcoin that somebody gets curious and they find us out there, we're trying, right? We're doing our part, and that's all we can do.
Absolutely. A million cogs in a giant machine, just all doing their part. So we're all just worker bees. One last thing, just tell people where they can find you, how they can get a hold of you, reach out.
I'm Boomer BTC on Twitter. I have a show that you can find on Spotify, YouTube, etc., called Old Man Yells. Thank you for mentioning that a few times today. And Barefoot Mining is our main site. So if you want to learn about what we do more specifically, you can find it there.
Awesome. I'll have all of that stuff in the show notes. With that, guys, I appreciate you all being here listening. I appreciate you, Bob, for being a part of the show. I couldn't do what I do without people like you. And so to that, I am super grateful, and I can't wait for the next one. So we will see everyone on the next episode. And until then, keep on stacking Bitcoin, keep on learning, keep on reading, educating yourself, and keep pushing that needle forward. Take care, everybody.